Award season is here and the Oscars are back on the telly on Sunday the 2nd of March. The biggest celebration of movies in the world, the best and brightest in the industry come together for a night of star-studded prize giving. But there's a lot more going on behind the trophies, and we've recruited our experts to help us unpack all things past, present and future. Welcome back to Explained, the Southampton Solent University podcast where we attempt to unpack what's going on behind the scenes of modern life, from sport and science to music and law, and everything in between. I'm your host, Robyn, and in this episode we're diving into the world's biggest awards night. The Academy Awards are emotional, celebratory, surprising, and sometimes controversial. But are they still relevant? So today we ask, what have we seen change in the awards' 97 years? What will this year's ceremony bring? And as always on Explained, what might the future look like? Today I'm joined by a couple of connoisseurs of cinema, Dr. Stuart Joy and Dr. Adam Vaughan. Course leader film and television here at Solent, Stuart is the author of books on Christopher Nolan, contemporary American science fiction and more. Stuart teaches across a wide range of courses and modules, inspiring the next generation of film and TV talent. Since 2017, Adam has also taught film and television at Solent. With an interest in documentary film, animation and queer cinema, he's contributed to collections exploring these themes and beyond. Welcome, Stuart and Adam.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us along.
And for bringing trophies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Give it away. So I want to start by talking about memorable moments, because for me, one of the things I love about the Oscars every year is there's always a lot of drama, I'm going to say, surprises, and often crying. And for me, one of the memorable moments has to be Moonlight winning Best Picture. I think, we were talking just now. It was awkward.
Eventually it won Best Picture. We've got to say that. It took a bit of time, but yeah, eventually the correct answer was given.
Exactly. That felt really, jokes aside, that felt like a really significant moment and a moment of progress because of what that story is about and the complexities of its main character. And I don't know if I'd seen a film like that winning Best Picture before. So I just was really interested in, for both of you, what's felt significant over the years. Maybe Stuart, if I come to you first.
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of what you've been mentioning there about that thing of live TV, I think it'd be weird if we didn't acknowledge the slap. The famous incident with Will Smith and Chris Rock, which I have explained now, but I think everybody has seen it and knows about it because of kind of how widespread the coverage was at the time. That was memorable for many, many reasons, but just that notion of, because it's live TV, anything can happen. And I think that's part of what the appeal of the Oscars ceremony is as well, is that as with that major gaffe with Moonlight and La La Land, likewise you can get a moment like that which is so unexpected and so unplanned that it's really exciting in some ways. My most memorable moment personally is the speech that Joe Pesci gave back in, I think it's 1990 or 91. So he won for Best Supporting Actor for Goodfellas. And his speech is famous because it's the shortest of all time in Oscar history. It's something like 5 words. He gets up on stage and he just says, "It's my privilege, thank you," and just walks off.
In true Joe Pesci style.
But actually, afterwards, when you listen to him talk about why was that speech so short, it's actually incredibly humbling. He just talks about that he didn't think that he had a chance of winning, so he didn't prepare in the slightest. And he talks about how there were so many people he could have thanked, but at the time he just wanted to kind of get off the stage. And I think that's really interesting because so many of those speeches are really kind of self-indulgent, whereas his felt really kind of quite genuine, and he wasn't making a grand statement or anything like that. He was just being really authentic, and so I think that really stuck with me personally.
Yeah, and I actually, interestingly, did my dissertation on Goodfellas, and he is just magnificent in that film, truly terrifying. But then I love that you see him as something like My Cousin Vinny, and he's completely different, and he's just very, very talented. And I think people tune in for those moments of like authenticity. So yeah, wonderful moment. Thank you. And Adam, what about you?
Just on that moment as well. Did you say, was that 91?
I think so.
How old are you? I'm guessing this is a YouTube situation.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, good. My moment would be in 2009 when Hugh Jackman was hosting. And he performed an opening musical number, and the whole gag was that this was 09, so 08, 09 financial recession, and it was done on a budget. So it was him going through all the different films, or some of the films that were nominated, but with like really rubbish cardboard cutout scenery, and drawing attention to the fact that this is really, really rubbish and low scale. At the time, it meant more as well, because I was doing my film undergraduate studies up the road, and we used to host as a film course Oscars parties, and we'd watch it live. So we'd stay up, UK time. It doesn't finish until probably 6 a.m. in the morning. And I remember that year we'd all made a pact, because we had a Monday 9 a.m. lecture to go to the next day, and we said we are all going to that lecture. We are not going to sleep. We're all just going to go. So we came in one by one, and I just remember seeing on the back row of the lecture theatre everyone who was at that party, and those are my people. I need to go and join them now. Just like this fog of alcohol and above their heads. But yeah, so that was fun.
And it was all for film.
It was all for the craft.
Thank you so much for sharing your top significant moments. I'm sure there's many more that we could unpick, but we don't have hours. So let's jump into this year's Oscars. So I'm just going to share some facts about this year. So leading the pack in terms of most nominations, we've got Emilia Perez with 13. And then we've got The Brutalist and Wicked, both with 10 nominations each. So this feels quite a diverse range of films here. So we've got a musical about a transgender cartel boss. We've got a post-war immigration epic, which has an intermission because it's really, really long. And a big budget musical that's great for all the family. So it does feel like these are all quite, like they just represent film in all of its different themes and subjects. But the Academy is often accused of being really out of touch. Do you think that this range of nominations and the titles that have been selected this year is kind of an attempt to prove their relevance? Adam, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, it's something they've struggled with for many years, this idea of remaining relevant. And cold hard facts, they've faced decreasing viewing figures for many, many years. So I think part of the fact that we have these sorts of films being nominated is them attempting to combat those falling viewing figures, because here we have films that, in the case of Emilia Perez, that are sparking quite controversial debates and people having strong opinions of the film. So that's something that it's a buzzy film. People will want to tune in and watch how it's treated by the Oscars if there's any controversy surrounding it on the actual night. And something like Wicked, which, as you say, if it's being seen by loads and loads of people, I think, has it crossed $1 billion now? It must be close to it if it hasn't yet. So that's bringing people in. If people love that film, they want to see, how is this film going to do on Oscars night? How many awards is it going to win? I think some of those challenges around viewing figures are a result of the changing climate of media and TV. That we've got satellite TV, digital streaming now, younger audiences as well, where if the Oscars were seen as a bit out of date, a bit old-fashioned, then how are they going to grab those audiences? And changing viewing habits as well, that we're moving away from a model of scheduled programming, which Oscars is, and it's a long program that's being scheduled, that it's that content on demand. So how do they kind of reconcile those things? Over the years, they have made some changes to address those accusations of being elitist as well, that, or if an Oscar nominates or awards a film with something, it's because it is the best, it is a masterpiece. In 2010, they increased the maximum number of Best Picture nominees from 5 to 10. So that allows for those greater breadth of films, some perhaps more, in inverted commas, popular than others. And in 2016, they responded to the previous year's controversy about the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite, where none of the 20 nominated performers at the 2015 ceremony were people of colour. And we'll talk a bit later, I think, around diversity and representation in some of these films. So they updated their membership as a result of that to encourage not just more racially diverse group members, but those from different age demographics, nationalities, which I think can partially account for this more varied selection of films that we're seeing, because members of the Academy, if they represent a more diverse base of people who are nominating films, perhaps they're nominating films that are therefore reflect their diverse identity characteristics, let's say. I did more research, Robyn. This is the kind of guest I am.
Oh, I love it. That's why we brought you here.
So, for example, on that front, out of the 600 plus films nominated for Best Picture in the Oscars history, just 16 have been foreign language films. Of those 16, 10 have been nominated since the Academy changed its membership rules. Right. So you can see, and that includes the first winner being Parasite in 2019, which is a great film.
Love that film.
So you can see that change that's happened as a result of that.
Yeah, I think it's really good that these changes have been made, but I think it's a shame that it's taken so long. And it's, really interesting that, to hear what has changed, and that actually those changes have led to more films and a more, a diversity of films getting the recognition that they deserve. But I want to ask you a slightly different question, Stuart, based off what Adam's just shared. So it's still on the kind of relevance side of things, but do you think that people winning an Oscar now, so a director, an actor, producer, do you think it matters to them as much now as it might have done 10, 20, 30 years ago? Do you still think there's that real want to have that Oscar?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, because of the industry prestige and that comes with that, with getting the award. I mean, you can tell that from the amount of press junkets and Q&A screenings, the lengths that the directors, the actors go to. I mean, if you take someone like Timothée Chalamet, just the desperation of which he seems to be trying to get an Oscar, it seems to indicate that there is still real value, not only in terms of the prestige that's then attached to those films that are released, but the career bump that those people invariably get as well. So I think it still matters incredibly. And I think, you were talking about Danny Boyle earlier on, but I mean, I think in the history of the Oscars, there are very few instances where someone has actively turned one down. You think the most famous is Marlon Brando, and so I think there's a huge desire to still receive an Oscar.
It's still the top one, isn't it?
And I think it also depends on what stage of career people are at as well. And we might talk a little bit about this later regarding Demi Moore, but I listened to a podcast recently which was a interview with Denzel Washington, and they asked him if he was disappointed with not being nominated for Gladiator 2, and he kind of just shrugged it off, really, because he's 70 years old, he's already been there and done that and won an Oscar already. But he talked about at the time how he was in a Broadway show, and that his priorities have changed. And so I think it's very dependent on where that person is in the context of their career as well, and how meaningful it is for them. With Timothée Chalamet, but he's very young, and so there is that desire there, and same with DiCaprio as well. They're much more likely to attach significance to it because of their place in their own journeys.
And Leonardo DiCaprio had to wait for a really long time to finally get that, didn't he? And I think when he did get it, he gave quite a muted speech, really. I think it's odd how it sometimes is out of reach for a really long time for people that perhaps deserved it for several different performances, and then by the time they do get it, it's like, okay, maybe this didn't mean as much to them as it seemed. But I think
there's another point there, isn't there, about this idea that you talked about the Oscars being the pinnacle, but prior to that, there's the SAG Awards, there's the DGA Awards, there's the BAFTA Awards, there's the CCAs, and so there's this whole raft of award ceremonies that lead up to that. And I can only imagine how many times DiCaprio gave a variation of that speech at every single one of those before he got to the Oscars, and you kind of wonder at that point, how much more is there to say how much more is who else can I thank?
Yeah.
You know, so
You feel like, I deserve this for The Departed. And now you only give it to me now.
And that raises the point that we were talking about at the start around the relevance of the Oscars. If it is the awards season is this procession towards the Oscars, then maybe part of the problem that they have with viewing figures is if everyone's hearing all these films and performances carry on winning, are there any surprises anymore? And I think that's maybe where sometimes the Oscars has fallen down. But then you could almost say that, okay, well, could we be expecting more surprises now because of this change in how they operate and how they nominate certain films and how it's voted for and things?
So let's go on to some of the titles that we just mentioned that are nominated this year. So let's start with Emilia Perez. I've read mixed things about this one. So it had a standing ovation in Cannes, but then there's been some comments about it lacking cultural sensitivity. I've not seen it. Have either of you seen it?
I've seen it.
Yeah, okay. So I'll come to you first on this one.
Okay.
Obviously, it is leading the pack with the most nominations. There has been some stuff lately that might be derailing the success it might manage at the Oscars. But, you know, is it worthy of those 13 nominations? Is it a step forward?
I don't see it as a step forward for trans representation especially, and actually the other side of that argument is around the representation of Mexicans on screen and resorting to particular stereotypes with cartels and violence and things like that. Without knowing for sure, I think perhaps part of the reason why the film's been shown so much Oscars love is precisely because of that buzziness that we were talking about, that it is prodding those issues, it is sparking those debates and having people come out and have strong feelings either way, whether you really like it or you loathe it, because it's being talked about by a broader audience. So it's beyond those just interested in the Oscars. So that takes us back to those like viewing figures and things. So if the Academy recognises that this sort of divisive film is doing things in wider culture and wider audiences, it might attract people to watch how it does or how it's received on the night. Perhaps also it's a film that speaks to the contemporary political climate in America, that with Trump's re-election as president and the fractious relationship that he has with, let's say, more liberal-minded institutions, of which the Oscars would consider itself one, it's the Academy doing a bit of protesting, you know, that we're going to nominate to death this film that has got a trans lead character. It's about Mexico and, you know, you're trying to build that wall in your previous term and all that stuff. You'd say in a very minor way, because how much can nominating a film for 13 Oscars actually do much stuff or enact much change? But it might be highlighting conversations to be had about this stuff, particularly as they relate to trans rights and immigration. So yes, I think that's my take on it. But as a film itself, I think it's a poor musical. I can't really sing you any. I think a good musical, and we'll talk about Wicked maybe a bit later on, is that you can sing some of the songs, and I can't tell you.
Is that because they're in Spanish?
I'm serviceable in Spanish.
Okay.
I've got I think a business certificate in language for Spanish, like Donde está la estación.
I did Duolingo for a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Out of 10, as a viewer, what are you giving it?
I think it's a 4.
Whoa, that's not good.
No, it's problematic for all those reasons,
yes.
But also it's just not. It's not what I consider to be a really interesting and good film. But I know some people really, really do like it.
And can I ask, so the nominations have come out. Are the winners set already? Do we know? Because I'm just wondering if all of the controversy that's been going on is going to derail those winners.
Yeah, usually the voting process happens about 2 weeks out from the ceremony. So the ceremony is not until first week of March. So those nominations probably aren't happening yet. So yeah, I'd be incredibly surprised if Carla Sofia Gascon wins Best Actress.
It's not looking good for her.
For a while, she was front runner for it. Really.
Yeah.
I think the film was up for Best Picture, like a front runner as well.
Yeah.
You know, so
Stuart. Sorry, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, I mean, I suppose going back to what a few things that Adam mentioned. The slew of nominations that came out in support of Emilia Perez was not surprising to me. If you look at, again, that wider context, it was, I think, 2 days after the Trump administration had announced a executive order essentially defining the amount of sexes in America to just male and female. And so 2 days later, there are these huge influx of essentially a vote of support in regards to trans rights. So it doesn't surprise me in terms of the amount of nominations. I agree wholeheartedly with Adam that it is a poor quality film. It's not entertaining. I think there are some saving graces. I think Zoe Saldana is fantastic in it, and she will undoubtedly win that Best Supporting Actress award.
Even though it's a leading performance, really.
Precisely.
Which is a whole nother issue with Oscars, yeah.
But again, going back to what Adam said, I think that you could arguably look at all of the nominations for Best Picture through that lens of Trump. If you take a look at something like The Brutalist, that's very much an overt kind of critique of immigration policies in the US. Enora is about sexual exploitation and about inequality, and it's about Russian oligarchs controlling people, and so there are clear kind of allusions to what's going on within the political climate there. But no, returning to Emilia Perez, I think it's a poor quality film that doesn't necessarily warrant those nominations, aside from when you frame it within the broader context within which it's made and been released.
Yeah I think it's a shame, because I think there was probably a lot of promise for something really magical to be made with that story and with that film, but obviously, as you've both said, it hasn't happened, and that's a real shame, because it's like a missed opportunity in some ways. Just before we move on to Wicked, one sort of final question really about Emilia Perez is, do you think that in the future we might see more films like this being nominated, and is it a kind of clickbaity thing? Is it kind of like, oh yeah, this is going to get us views, this is going to get people tuning in?
To an extent, I think there would be a line that the Academy wouldn't want to cross there, because to nominate films that are I was going to say objectively bad, then that would be...
I'm sorry, Emilia Perez.
Yeah, well, but as I say, but some people really like it, and as we've made a case for certain performances and sequences, the way they're edited, the way they're shot are interesting. But if it was going to be nominating, I'm not going to trash a particular franchise, but let's say Fast and Furious.
I knew you were going to say that. I love Tokyo Drift so much.
I've never seen one, so I can't comment. I can't say that they're trashy, but I just understand that some people don't like them very much. But do you see what I mean? That if they were nominating that for Best Picture, even if it was a good example from the franchise, that it has, the Academy has a brand that it needs to uphold.
Stuart, anything to add there?
I think there's a few things. The Oscar numbers, whilst they have been in decline historically over the years, they have actually picked up over the last few years or so. And I think that feeds into what Adam said about that kind of opening up of the nominations, the amount of films that are eligible for Best Picture and things like that. I think that the Emilia Perez kind of controversies, I think certainly with regards to the offensive tweets, I think if anything, they make the ceremony more interesting, because there is a genuine chance of an upset or something unexpected happening. We talked earlier about this idea that the awards season ultimately leads into a kind of procession of the outcome is already known prior to going into it, whereas on this occasion, because the Oscar votes haven't happened yet, and we just don't know how much of an impact those controversies are going to have, that there is a genuine chance that what we thought might have happened based on previous results just won't be what happens on the night. So I think the Oscar race is probably as open as it ever has been on this occasion. So I'd be inclined to think that the numbers will be higher. Going back to the initial point about the kind of clickbait nature of the film. Again, that goes back to what Adam mentioned about the changing modes of reception, this idea that people are increasingly more so just filming small excerpts on their phones, and then that's getting uploaded to TikTok, and then it's just becoming, memes, and so there is an argument there that it's just responded to the culture again within which it's been produced.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. And I think, yeah, like you said, previously it felt like Emilia Perez was probably going to sweep the board, and now it's all open. Let's move on to Wicked. Very popular film. Everyone I know who's seen it loved it. Really enjoyed it. It's had brilliant reviews. It's made a lot of money, and it's got a lot of nominations at the Oscars this year. I have picked out a little thing to share that Ariana Grande said in an interview, and this was talking about her character. And she said, whether it's romantic or platonic, Glinda might be a little in the closet. So there's a lot being said about this film being very representative of the LGBT plus community, being quite celebratory of it. You know, a lot of the actors in the film identify as queer in their personal lives, and the world of Oz in general has probably always been fairly popular among that community. I mean, Adam, you're an expert in this area. What are your thoughts on how significant this film is for the community?
It is significant for those reasons that you outlined there, that it's building upon the significance that the 1939 film version has for so many LGBT people. It's there in, I suppose, the narrative of that film, with, you know, someone escaping that oppressive black and white straight world and can escape into this Technicolor land of Oz and be who they are. There's sort of queer codings with particular characters as well, like the lion and the scarecrow, let's say, and also the Tin Man, who I played actually on stage once at a school play. Yeah,
amazing.
I was the Tin Man. If only I had a heart. I won't break out into singing it. So that film has built up quite a substantial queer fan base and resonance over the decades. So anything that is in that universe, I think, already has that resonance with it. So it's something that continues with Wicked. It was partly that 1939 film version that inspired the author Geoffrey Maguire, who also is gay, to write the book version of Wicked for it to then be adapted into a musical. So there's things outside of the text and outside of the film, and also within it as well, I think. Thinking of Wicked specifically, we've got the main character of Elphaba, who's constantly trying to break out of this world of expectations that other people have of her. She is different. She doesn't look like everyone else. She doesn't behave like everyone else. If you just think of those opening lines to Defying Gravity, that it's, you know, something has changed within me, something's not the same anymore. That could equally be talked about in terms of like queer desire, you know. So there's things there that are ripe for queer readings. I'd not heard those comments from Ariana Grande, actually, but they make sense because of, if we're thinking about the significance it might have for queer audiences to find those readings within the film. So whether there's anything in the text itself that leads us to those conclusions, who knows? But if it's being seen by lots of people within the community, then they might reach those decisions. In terms of the film text as well, looking at a character like Prince Fiero, played by Jonathan Bailey in the film, it seems to me the way he's playing this character is just anything that appears in his eye line, he's going to seduce. You know, be that man, woman, or broomstick. It really doesn't matter. It's so that there is this pansexuality to that character that I don't know if it's in the book. I haven't seen the book, I haven't seen the musical either, so I don't know about that. But maybe not just the LGBT community as well. I think there's things that the film is quite audibly saying about race politics as well, with the magical animal creatures that are being ousted from their jobs as part of the University of Shiz. Come on, Shiz University. It's ridiculous. And so they might be having things to say there around this autocratic leader of Oz, you know, as well. We've talked about Trump politics and things. So there's lots of, it's as a text, and most fantasy texts can do this, you can find metaphors and references to things in the real world that may be there deliberately or might just be accidental, but doesn't make them any less relevant.
The way that you've described the film as well just sounds really beautiful and wonderful. And maybe, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but maybe kind of a gentle introduction to younger audiences in being yourself and, you know, being authentic to who you really are, even if that doesn't marry up with what you've been told to be. Would you say that's true in some regards?
Yeah, I think there's a universal theme there about accepting difference, because there's the central relationship is about these two characters who come from different walks of life, who initially are enemies, are then friends, and then, I'm guessing, end up frenemies. I haven't read the book, or I haven't seen the stage version, but I know what happens leading up to Wizard of Oz. So I think there are those universal themes for young audiences, and of course with those sorts of films as well, that there is just that sort of visual sumptuousness to it that characters or the audiences can lose themselves in. I must say it's too long. I found it far too long, and there were moments that dragged for me.
Okay.
But when it flies, it really does fly.
And Stuart, for you, just going, following on from what Adam said, do you think it's actually got quite strong chances at this year's Oscars to soar?
Do you know what? I, as eloquently as Adam has described the plot and the story, I just don't think it does.
Okay.
I think it's a wonderful, populist, and incredibly popular film, but that will actually be to its kind of detriment in terms of its success. I can certainly see it winning in best costume, potentially, makeup as well, but production design. So some of those more technical categories. But I mean, the fact that the director is not nominated for Best Director is an indication that its success as a Best Picture is probably unlikely as well.
Yeah. What a shame in some ways, though. We've got this film that is making lots of audiences happy and, sharing lots of positive messages, and it's not good enough, for that Best Director nod. Or do you think there's a little bit of snobbery?
Absolutely. I think historically it could be a case of with Wicked and other films like The Substance as well, where the Academy has traditionally had a firm sense of what kind of film it wants to give the awards to, or what the membership consider to be an awards-worthy film. And it tends to be those, serious, real-world-based narratives, biopics of famous people. When it comes to performing categories, seeing the transformation of people into a real person, the convincing nature of the performance compared to the real person. Historically, it hasn't really awarded films like this, although sometimes you then will get outliers like Lord of the Rings, which just wins absolutely everything that particular year. I think it will be interesting to see what categories it does pick up. I agree with you, Stuart, that I don't see it winning anything outside of those technical ones. Although I think Ariana Grande is fantastic in it, and I would be very happy with her winning Supporting Actress.
She's just fantastic in everything, isn't
and
she?
And that is possible because, again, we go back to the Emilia Pérez controversies. There is an outside chance that Academy voters feel that film is so tainted that they just don't want anything to do with it and won't vote for anything that's attached to it, which would be a real shame for Zoe Saldana. But yeah, there's a worthy kind of successor waiting in the wings in Ariana Grande there.
So we've talked about those bigger movies that are nominated this year, and we've already mentioned these ones a couple of times, but I want to talk about Anora and The Substance. So I was really excited to see Demi Moore pick up the Best Actress award at the Golden Globes. I loved her speech. I love what she said about, being told that this was never going to happen for her. And then here she was, doing it. And with Anora, I'm really excited about the film being nominated for these really prestigious awards, because I feel, for those that don't know, this is a film about a sex worker. And she comes from a disadvantaged community. It just feels to me like maybe 10 years ago, a film like that wouldn't have got the recognition it's getting. And I really want Mikey to get the Best Actress Oscar, just because I think she's really cool. But again, The Substance, is that the kind of film that would have been getting getting a nod a few years ago? It's because it's quite grotesque and, lots of body horror. So are modern audiences more comfortable with stories like this now? And are we less judgmental when it comes to these types of stories being told?
I think, so using the example of Anora, I think, again, there's a wider context there that plays into the potential popularity or the relevance of that film. If you think about how OnlyFans became such a prominent platform, over the past 5 years during the pandemic and so on and so forth. So this idea about sex positivity and just a broader kind of cultural acceptance about sex workers and what they do. And I think that would probably feed into the narrative as to why this film has a strong chance of winning a Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress. So there is a broader context which I think makes this sort of film more popular than it would be, or certainly more likely of winning awards as well. I think The Substance is a really interesting one because historically, and I think Adam kind of alluded to this already, but body horror is not a genre that is top of the priority list when it comes to the Academy voters. It really foregrounds those debates that we were kind of hinting at earlier between kind of highbrow culture and lowbrow. And so to see that up there, I think is really fascinating. But I do wonder if that nomination is being led by the narrative that underpins Demi Moore's journey, rather than it is, again, necessarily about the quality of the film or even the performance necessarily. I mean, I think she's fantastic in it, of course, but I think there's a level of authenticity, to use that word again, within Mikey Madison's performance that is more resonant than this, sort of actress who's at the tail end of her career and really kind of self-reflexively sort of performing herself in many ways.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that The Substance is there is really great, but equally I think it's more attached to her, the narrative that underpins her journey. And that's what the Oscars is also all about, isn't it? It's about the stories we tell about why people have been nominated. And, we mentioned DiCaprio earlier as, again, there's a narrative arc there, isn't there?
And do you think people are attracted to, like you were saying, Demi Moore coming back almost into the industry, getting this nod? I think about, it's different, but Mickey Rourke with The Wrestler, him getting that recognition for that and then kind of ostensibly disappearing a little bit again, do you think people are just really attracted, I say people, the Academy, attracted to these actors who have had their heyday, they've disappeared, they're back, they put in a really great performance and they want to recognise that?
I wonder on the case of The Substance if it's more to do with the mirror that film holds up to society with some of the debates that people are having. So it has that body horror conceit to it, but it is essentially about female aging and the gracefulness with which women age and how their bodies are treated by, in this case, the media, film and TV industry itself. So I think this is where the Oscars can be really useful, is that it can show us what the industry thinks about some of those debates that are going on outside of itself, So we've got those two performances and these two films that are, I think for me, are very much part of this whole post, if we can call it post, Me Too context as well, where we've got female characters that have substantive roles, that are interesting characters, but that are speaking about particular issues faced by women within the wider world as well. I think that's part of that conversation that's surrounding those films, which might fit into other edgier films that the Academy might nominate as well, to sort of show us how the wider world is feeling about particular issues, how that's communicated through film.
And I hope now there's more of an appetite actually for stories about complex women and the complexities of being a woman, whether that's aging or whether that's how you make your living. I don't know if people cared about that so much, maybe before Me Too, but when we were talking about significant moments earlier, the award season after Me Too, everyone wearing black, everyone, telling their stories. That was haunting, but it was so important. So
yeah, you're right with Change's Slow, because you take a look again, there's Best Picture nominees, I think it's like 9 out of 10 of them are directed by men, and again, when you look at the Best Director list, again, it's 4 out of 5 that are men. So there's clearly problems there that are deeper that need to be addressed. But yeah, these are all small steps towards hopefully kind of systemic change.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So you mentioned a couple of categories earlier that were a bit more behind the scenesy, so sound, costume, editing, cinematography. These are big categories, big jobs, and they go into making fantastic movies, but they perhaps get less kudos in the mainstream. So are there any films, I'd love to know, that have been nominated this year that have stood out for you in terms of those lesser known categories, but very important categories. Maybe if I start with you, Adam.
For me, production design and Conclave would be one, which for those who don't know is about the Pope dies. I mean, there's a relevance here because the Pope is in hospital at the moment.
He is.
And the Ralph Fiennes character is in charge of overseeing the election of the new Pope, which is the whole thing with the white and black smoke that we might recall in our lifetimes when popes have died and new ones been elected. So it takes place, as the whole film, almost exclusively in the Vatican, or in the place that is dressed and designed to look like the Vatican. I think it does a great job of making you believe in that space, that we are actually in the hallowed halls of this really historic, religiously significant place that was filmed instead at a royal palace in Campania in Italy. So I think that for me is where production design is really working, because you're not questioning, you're not actually noticing perhaps things to do with the location. It's not necessarily drawing attention to the fact that this is a construction. You just believe that you're in the world of this film. So there's a skill, I think, of convincing an audience that they're in such a famous location. Also, as well, for this film specifically, one of the joys I had when I was watching it is just when I was seeing the trailers and the posters and things, I didn't know if this was like a period drama or if when is this happening. And to see papal officers and sisters running through the Vatican in their Skechers trainers and puffing on a vape and checking their smartphone. It's just really, it was just fun to watch those sorts of things of bringing together old and new.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? And really stepping inside that world. And that's mastery, isn't it? Like people doing their jobs to the best of their abilities to create this world. So thank you. What about you, Stuart?
I think one of the interesting films this year is The Brutalist. So it was shot on 35mm, but particularly in VistaVision. And this is really fascinating to me because there is this kind of industry trend towards celluloid, shooting on film rather than digital. And we saw that last year with Oppenheimer, shooting on IMAX. And there are a number of other examples. I think Barbie also had sections of it which were shot on 35mm as well. So there's this real sense of trying to get audiences to come back to the cinema. Again, going back to COVID and that pandemic, is, there's been a decline in terms of attendance and numbers of people because of other factors like streaming and so on and so forth. But, there's a clear attempt to utilise the form to get people to come back to the cinema, to embrace it for what it uniquely offers, which is that sense of size and scale. VistaVision was something which is also part of cinema's history. It was, a format which was used by Alfred Hitchcock on things like Vertigo. And so there's this real sense of filmmakers now, and cinematographers in particular, tapping into this kind of rich, layered history of film and embracing that as a means to make the theatrical experience feel special. There's some other things which I think are interesting just in terms of production technologies, it certainly with regards to artificial intelligence, for example, the controversies surrounding the use of re-speecher on The Brutalist and Emilia Perez as well, and how those debates will change the rules for the Oscars. I think that as a result of that, they've now created a new rule which requires all films to disclose their use of AI moving forward. So there's some really fascinating debates going on within some of those other categories which we might kind of commonly deem as lesser than, but of course they're just as important.
Absolutely. It's all the elements going into a film, isn't it, that would not be the finished product without this. I mean, with The Brutalist, I just love Adrian Brody, and I think to be honest, my prediction would be he's definitely going to get the trophy because he's just wonderful in everything he's in. So obviously another category that we haven't spoken about but it's equally important is Best Documentary. Adam, you're a fan of documentary filmmaking. I've read your bio. Tell me if it's wrong. It's overlooked, it's overshadowed. We often, we don't talk about documentaries that much when it comes to award season. But what's interested you this year? Just to say about documentary in terms of the Academy as well, that mentioned those figures for
foreign language films, so no documentary has ever been nominated for Best Picture, and there is that sense also with Best Animation as well, that certain films are siloed off into their own little categories and they get their awards there. But actually, if this award ceremony is working properly, could we not just have all films eligible for all awards, really? But anyway, I think of the films that are nominated this year, the one standout for me is a film called No Other Land, which takes place over 7 or 8 years, I think, and focuses on the efforts of a Palestinian activist and journalist called Basel, and he's protesting against the destruction of his local village called Masafa Yatta by Israeli soldiers. So it's a really timely, relevant film, although the stuff that happens in the film is pre the October attacks by Hamas. And this is depicting over 7 or 8 years his struggles to keep his village from being destroyed and rebuilding, but also he during that time forms an alliance with an Israeli journalist. So it centres on these themes of humanity and not letting difference separate us, and personal costs of conflict. There are some really heart-wrenching sequences of the villagers that are seeing their homes, their whole lives just torn apart. And also the power of film, and also the power of the documentary camera, I think, to be placed in the heart of the action, to have the access to those individual stories, is really, really powerful film. That's the one I would highlight.
This is why film was my first love. It's so essential. And I think the role of documentary as well is actually educating people on a subject they might not have considered if they'd just read about it on the news or seen an article in The Guardian about it. But if they are interested by the title or the trailer, they might click on and actually learn something and have their view changed. And that's just really important, right?
Yeah, what's really interesting about that film you mentioned, though, but it hasn't picked up a US distributor. So I think, again, that speaks to that wider cultural context within which these films are made and the kind of impact they can or can't have depending on who the gatekeepers of taste fundamentally are. But you're right, yeah, these documentaries have such value to society, and they can change how people think and feel about subjects.
Thank you. So we like to end every episode with the future. Obviously, you're not psychics. I'd love to know what the future of the Oscars looks like for both of you. Do you think they're going to continue to be really important and determine the worth of a film, the worth of an actor or director? What do the next few years look like for the Oscars?
Yeah, I think they're a bit of a crossroads, right? Because in some ways they're stuck between the traditions that they've had, since their inception, but also change. On the one side, they've been trying to diversify their membership to rethink what an Oscar-worthy film looks like, and we've talked about, why isn't Wicked nominated? Why won't Wicked win the best feature? But on the other hand, there's plenty of backlash, and we've mentioned the Trump administration a number of times. But this war on woke and DEI, does that mean that they're losing their power? Not entirely. They still matter. We talked earlier about this idea that winning one, it boosts the box office numbers. It solidifies the industry recognition, and it does carry that level of prestige that they always have. But they don't hold the same power that they used to. And we've talked about this already, but audiences, streaming platforms, critic circles, those are the people that are increasingly shaping the conversations around what stands out in cinema, without having that necessary stamp of approval. So I guess the question about the future is whether or not they can evolve in a way which resonates to audiences, because there is a real danger that the Academy, like, say, the Democrats in the US, they can become an echo chamber for themselves, that they don't necessarily speak to what people actually think and feel on the ground, and that will further disenfranchise people that may have been interested in the past. So it's a tricky balance, but they've got to try and embrace change without getting tangled in those kind of political firestorms. And if they can do that, they'll still have a role in shaping the future of film, but they might just not have the final word on it.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. And Adam, do you agree with that?
Yeah,
What's your hot take?
I think I agree with what Stuart's saying. my perspective is on the Oscars is that, so, well, we've been looking at the Oscars, haven't we? But actually awards ceremonies might be something else for us to just broadly consider, but refracted through what the Oscars is doing. We've talked a lot about how the Oscars is trying to diversify its membership, the films that it nominates from different countries, different cultures. Actually, there's a load of award ceremonies around the world that are specifically from a particular country or accept films that are from a particular country. I mean, we haven't really mentioned much about the BAFTAs, but that's always had a British skew to it. Yes, it's broadly American films as well. But could there be a case that if we're thinking the Oscars is just going to continue to diversify, is that going to make other award ceremonies even less relevant if it's accepting all these different, very diverse films? So maybe there's a counter argument here, is that actually the Oscars can do its little Oscars thing and let other award ceremonies do its thing as well, even though they might not have that platform on which they can speak and shout about these films.
Yeah, they're all going to fight it out, maybe, like in a boxing ring. I don't know. Okay, I think we'll end there. But I mean, Stuart, Adam, I've had a wonderful time chatting with you about this year's Oscars, and I feel like we could talk for a lot longer. This is the longest episode we've recorded so far, I think.
Sorry.
No, it's been. I've had a wonderful time, and I hope you have. And I've learned a lot too. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Our thanks to Stuart and Adam for joining us on this week's episode of Explained. And as always, thank you, listener, for tuning in. Like what you heard today? Let us know. You can find us online at solent.ac.uk, as well as on all your favourite podcasts and social media platforms. Leave a review to let us know what you thought of today's episode, and be the first to hear the next episode by hitting that subscribe button. Thank you, and see you soon.